like it should. No, just have some grace with us. But we want to get started. We don't want to take up too much of anybody's time, so I have the pleasure of introducing each and every one of the people, the panelists, who are going to be here tonight. Let me open my Word document. I should have done that before. That probably would have been helpful. Anyways, that's awkward. Y'all good? Woo! All right. All right, so looking at this, we have Mr. Bob Swanson. That's the correct pronunciation. That's the correct pronunciation? So, Professor Bob Swanson makes a living teaching science concepts here at Mississippi State. You teach astronomy and natural science, correct? Physical science. Yeah, something to me. Yeah. Anyways, when he doesn't have an answer or sufficient explanation, he's happy to admit his ignorance. His hope is that through the practice and application of critical thinking skills, others will come to enjoy the freedom that such honesty provides. Bob lives in Starkville with his wife, Meredith, 3 wonderful sons, a dog, and a cat. Everybody give it up for Mr. He didn't send me an introduction, so he is a junior accounting student here at Mississippi State, an amazing guy, so everybody clap it up. And finally, we have Cliffe and Stuart here. So Cliffe and Stuart they're both pastors, Cliffe being the senior pastor, and Stuart, you're an associate, right? Associate pastor at Grace Community Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. They also are authors and respected speakers who spend time at university campuses answering tough questions from faculty and students about their beliefs. Cliffe and Stuart, Cliffe has built up a strong family with his wife Sharon and his 3 sons, Robert, Stuart, and Ian. Everybody give it up for Mr. Cliffe. All right. You ready? So Stuart's going to go over a couple of ground rules for how tonight is going to go. But I want to tell you all, once again, thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Ground rules sounds intense. Really, you're just going to do some parameters. So first off, I want to say thank you to the Free Thinkers, Agnostics, and Atheists at MSU Club. So Wednesday nights at 6 is their regular meeting time, and so they graciously invited Cliffe and Stuart in to have this conversation today. So I just want to say thank you to them for doing that. So first off, I want to say this is not a debate. I think that word's been kind of thrown out a lot today. So this is not a debate at all. This is simply a discussion, and it's a chance for all of us to learn. So we're not here to preach to anyone or convert anyone. We're here to learn and to discuss. So I ask that you do not applaud at all at any of the answers. We're all going to take positions of learners tonight. We're not at a sporting event cheering for one side or the other. We're all in the same position of learning. So I ask that you not applaud. At the very, very end, we'll have a chance to give a round of applause. But during the discussion and the question and answer, do not applaud at all. Don't do what they're doing over there. So with that, there will be opportunities to ask questions at different dates. So tomorrow night at 8 p.m., Chi Alpha is doing a worship service. There'll be worship music, a student testimony. And then rather than a sermon, there's going to be a Q&A with Cliffe and Stuart. They'll also be on the Joe Field tomorrow, so there's an opportunity to ask your questions there. And then for the Free Thinkers, Agnostics, and Atheists at MSU Club, they're doing Ask an Atheist Friday on the drill field. If it rains on Friday, then that will just be postponed to after spring break, but that will be an opportunity to ask questions there. So tonight we just have, what we're going to do, how this is going to work is we have 4 questions that they already know. And so I'll ask the questions here so you guys can know them. And then we're just going to go one by one down the line. Each will have 5 minutes to answer the question however they choose. And then if they go over 5 minutes, I'm going to cut them off. So I can mute your microphone with my iPad here. So and then I'm going to talk over you in the lecture. But you don't have to go the whole 5 minutes if you want to. And then, so we'll just go one by one for each, and then the second question, we'll start at the end, so we'll start with Stuart and work our way back. And then question 3, we'll go this way, and question 4, come back. So it's just 4 questions tonight. They each have 5 minutes to answer however they want. But like I said, anyway, okay, there we go. This is a discussion, not a debate. So, with that being said, anybody nod in your head, like I hear you, we all agree. Very good. Okay, so with that being said, we'll go ahead and get started. So, the first question, and we'll start with you, Bob. The first question is the universe a byproduct of happenstance or intelligent design?
Okay. Well, thank you, Stuart. Thank you all for coming. And, thank you all for coming. My goodness. I was not expecting this kind of turnout. So the question being, is the universe a byproduct of happenstance or intelligent design? I don't know. You'll hear that a lot from me. That's part of my introduction. And there's not a whole lot I can do about it. Now, I will refer you to some of you got a little paper slip coming in. I only made 80 of them because I was not expecting this kind of a turnout. So if you do you have one of those paper slips? Anybody got one? Awesome. Terrific. So on the back, you're going to see, I'm actually going to borrow this one to model. There's a bunch of QR codes. There's a group me for our FAMSU group. That's one of the QR codes. There's a blog entry called I'm Giving Up Certainty for Lent. And certainty is something I'm going to be talking about quite a bit. I worry that we are experiencing a pandemic of certainty. A lot of folks are really, really confident about things, and they really don't know why they're so confident. And it's a recurring theme in my classes. There's also a QR code here for a critical thinking playlist. These are videos. It's a YouTube playlist of videos that I've created, little lectures about critical thinking skills. And finally, there's a QR code for the Navigating Beliefs course. I'm a big fan of street epistemology. And this is a course that you can take online, it's free, which will teach you the rudiments of street epistemology. Now on the back here, let me see, an X and a dot, right? So if you have one of these, and if you don't, hopefully one of the other people will scan the QR codes and then pass along to you. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to hold that thing out, and close your left eye, and with your right eye, pay a lot of attention to that dot. Really focus on that dot. And bring the paper slowly toward your nose. And one hand, does anybody notice anything? Right about a hand width from your nose, what happens? Anybody get to work? You can shut it out. Thank you, the X disappears. Awesome. Now reverse. Close your right eye. And with your left eye, pay attention to that X. Don't lose that X. Bring it toward your nose. And what happens? What happens when you stare at the X?
Disappears.
The dot disappears, right? Now one thing, does it disappear? What happens?
It's your blind
Where the X
spot.
was, it turns out to be white. Where the dot was, it turns out, it kind of fills in the crosshairs, right? Is that your experience? What are we learning here? You're finding your blind spot. It turns out that the way the human eye is wired, there are, in your retina, there are rods and cones, photosensitive cells that turn light into electrical signals that go to your brain. And they go there via an optic nerve, which is attached to the retina. And there's a spot where the optic nerve attaches to the retina where there are no rods and cones. Your retina, you're not getting any information from that spot. That's what you're discovering. Now, what is your brain doing? Your brain guesses all the time. Where it's not getting information, it assumes, remember you closed your eye and it wanted to be white, right? It assumes, hey, I don't know what's going on there. I'm going to guess that whatever's there is the same as over here. That's why the crosshair is filled in. It's guessing You can't see what's happening there, so it fills in with the context around. Okay? Pretty cool? Have we learned something? This is the limit of my knowledge of human physiology. Now, has this affected your self-esteem?
No.
No? Okay, good. Well, if it did, you think, gosh, I got this blind spot, go home, talk to your cat or your dog. I've got a dog named Lucy, I've got a cat named Frosty.
30 seconds.
And they say, I feel you. We have the same problem. Because they're vertebrates. The vertebrate eye evolved on the same chain, the branch of life. Who doesn't have this problem? Your friendly neighborhood cephalopod. Talk to a squid or an octopus about this, they're going to have no clue what you're talking about.
Thank you, Bob. Cliff? Yeah, we ask that you please remain silent so Cliff has an opportunity to speak.
All right, why do I think that God exists? I think that God exists not because I can... Test, 1, 2. Why am I convinced that God exists? Not because I can prove God. I cannot prove God. I cannot prove that you're not a dream that I'm having right now. You cannot prove that I'm not a very bad dream you are having right now. Instead, you and I as thinking human beings do not base our lives on proof. To prove means to show it cannot be another way. Instead, we base our lives on evidence. The evidence is you are there, I am here, that's why you are listening to me speak right now, and that's why I'm looking at you. I'm not turning around talking to the whiteboard behind me. Because the evidence is you are people who are sitting before me. That is why I am behaving the way I am right now. So why do I think the evidence is that God exists? If there is no God, then non-existence produces existence. That's a miracle. But my atheist friends have no miracle worker. If there is no God, then chaos produces order. That's a miracle. The problem is there is no miracle worker if there is no God. In reality, if there is no God, non-life produces life. That's a miracle. For non-life to produce life, that is a miracle. The problem is, if I'm an atheist, there is no miracle worker. If there is no God, matter produces morals. That is a miracle. For matter, inanimate matter, to produce good and evil, that is a miracle. But if there is no God, there's no miracle worker. In my thinking, it's rather clear. If there is no God, then I have to accept that non-reason produces reason. That's a miracle. For the irrational to produce the rational, that's a miracle. But if atheism is true, there is no miracle worker. You see, my problem is, these are all miracles. But if atheism is true, there is no miracle worker. Second piece of evidence for God's existence is order and design. If I say that this wristwatch I found coming to this meeting tonight, I'm lying on the side of the road, and if I try and persuade you that isn't it incredible the way the metal just sort of came together, the extra pieces of glass and metal just sort of fell off, and lo and behold, as a result of the impersonal plus chance plus time, we had a wristwatch, I think you might get up and walk out of here right now. That's crazy. The order and design of the wristwatch point to some type of intelligent mind, a watchmaker. Travel from the wristwatch down to the hand. The hand is far more complex, far more intricately designed than the wristwatch. If you think I'm crazy for believing this wristwatch is an accident, then what am I if I think this hand is a cosmic accident? So order and design point to some type of intelligent mind behind it all. Obviously, Jesus Christ is not part of the discussion right now. It's simply a question of atheism versus theism. Now, if there is no God, there cannot be any moral absolutes. I am convinced to the root of my being that the abuse of an innocent child is wrong. Not relatively wrong, not subjectively wrong, regardless of what a culture thinks. To abuse innocent children, to gas Jews, to exercise apartheid in South Africa, to exercise slavery in the United States, is evil because it is a denigration of a human being created in the image of God, who God created all of us to love and respect. If there is no God, what is a kiss? A kiss is the approach of two pairs of lips with a reciprocal transmission of carbon dioxide and microbes. That's all a kiss is. Baloney. When I kiss my wife, there's a lot more to that kiss than simply a transmission of microbes and carbon dioxide. So, when you look at the evidence, I think it's rather clear. It is more plausible to say, in the beginning God, than it is plausible to say, in the beginning hydrogen.
Gabe, the likeness number is excellent. Gabe, is the university a byproduct of happenstance or intelligent design?
Yeah, so I think I've studied this issue quite a bit. For me, it's a tough question. I think, for one, I'd probably go with quantum physics for the beginning of the universe, as that's probably the most well-supported evidence that I see so far. I'd like to piggyback a little bit off what Cliff said for the remaining of my time, where we talk about the watchmaker argument. So the argument that Cliff did is basically very similar to the watchmaker argument that was originally made. The argument goes as follows. I'm walking on a beach. I see a watch. I know that the watch was designed. It seems there are these inherent qualities to this thing that separate it from everything else. I think majority of us would be convinced by this argument. But for me, it seems that this argument, the only logical thing we can actually get from it is that everything else around the watch wasn't designed, right? Because we look at the watch and we know that there's something different compared to everything else. Otherwise, we wouldn't know that the watch is designed. By looking at the watch, we immediately know everything else isn't designed. That's a big sticking point for me. Also go back to a few of the miracles you mentioned. I myself am a moral realist. What that means is I believe there are objective moral facts. Now, Cliff would perhaps say that this is impossible, I cannot hold this, right? Metaethics, which is the study of field in philosophy about morality, where it comes from. There's multiple positions in this. This field is as complex as philosophy of mind usually. It'd be quite interesting to know that majority of atheists are actually moral realists. And why is this the case? Right, there's many propositions for this. You have cognitivism and non-cognitivism. These two are the separate parts of metaethics. From there you go down into moral realism and different parts of non-cognitivism like emotivism and other things. So with regard to this, I am a naturalistic moral realist, which is to say I believe there are inherent properties that are these moral naturalistic properties. And these are illimitable in the best of our experience of the universe. And there's multiple arguments to show this with regard to scientific realism and others. Now, with regard to what Cliff said about rationality coming from irrationality, we have to first define our terms a little bit, as it's a little confusing. So the definition of rationality that I'm going with is based on or in accordance with reason or logic, right? So for one, I think we can all know, or at least positively show, that logic and reason are descriptive. They're how we come to know about the world, right? So if these things are descriptive, then they already exist. So we just believe rationality because of rationality. The question is no longer if rationality produces rationality, or rationality is rationality. With regard to life and non-life, I mean, it's a complex question of abiogenesis. There's multiple points of it. You have people like, I believe, like a few people who argue against it. You know, I think there's one famous, I believe he's a organic chemist, I believe, who argues against it all of the time. There's also plenty of proponents for it, and the majority of the evidence supports their position. Now, during all of this, it seems really hard to judge whether or not, like, how the universe kind of came. And I'm not really sure how we would judge that the universe is intelligently designed. Right? All we know is that the universe exists, and we exist. How do we get anywhere else from that? How can we tell something is inherent to the universe unless we had something to compare it to? That's how we kind of do that. But with regard to philosophy and other fields of study, I'm not really sure how we get anywhere to the question about other things such as that. And I hope we go into the moral argument more and the moral propositions, as I really enjoy that. But, thank you.
Can I just ask, where were all of you at 10 o'clock this morning at my physical science lecture?
Oh my gosh. This is insane. Hey everybody! We did it! We did it! Welcome everyone. Alright, so we already started, as you could probably tell. So we're gonna keep going from where we left off, but before that I wanted to address the new half of the room. Everybody say hi. Hello, hello. We're happy that you guys are all here. So Stuart's gonna go over the rules just one more time so that everybody is at an understanding. Couple quick things. This is a discussion, not a debate. And Stuart's gonna go a bit more into that, but like he's talked about with us and he'll talk about with you, we're here to be learners tonight, not cheering for either side, but seeking just understanding. And so I'm gonna hand it off to Stuart.
Yeah, like DJ said, this is not a debate. That word's been thrown around a lot. This is not a debate. This is a discussion. And it's a chance for all of us to learn. So I ask that you don't applaud at all. We're not at a sporting event where we're cheering and applauding, but we're all taking the positions of learners tonight. And so, y'all, this side, y'all have been doing a lot of clapping. All right? So I hope you got all your clapping out of you. At the end, when we conclude this, we'll all do one big, standing ovation for all of our speakers. But during the discussion, we're all taking positions of learners. I would hope that this discussion tonight would trigger some questions in you. And so tomorrow night at 8 p.m. At Taylor Auditorium, Chi Alpha Campus Ministry is doing a worship service. And rather than a sermon, it's going to be a Q&A with Stuart and Cliffe. And then on Friday, the Free Thinkers Agnostics and Atheists Club is doing Ask an Atheist on the drill field. If it rains, it will just be postponed until after spring break. But that will give you an opportunity to ask questions to that side as well. But so tonight, how this is working is we have 4 questions. And we're starting question 1. It's just one by one for each person. They each get 5 minutes. And then question 2, we start on the other end and work our way back. And we'll just do serpentine for the 4 questions. So, once again, we're all taking the positions of learners tonight. And so, right now the question on the table is the universe a byproduct of happenstance or intelligent design? And Stuart, you're up.
I think all of us. I think all of us, if we are honest, know that this place is a product of incredible design. The more and more science we get, the more and more we realize just how incredibly fine-tuned this cosmos, and specifically this world, is to allow something like human life to exist. Cosmologists now say that it is unimaginable for us to even begin to grasp how small the percentage chance is that we exist here on this planet. Now, Bob said we are living in a pandemic of certainty. I could not disagree more with that. We are living in a pandemic of uncertainty. All of the studies show that, every single one. There's a reason why over 50% of you right now have clinical anxiety. That's because of the pandemic of uncertainty. There's a reason why when I talk to agnostics and they say we're free thinkers, there's a reason why if you really get underneath that, they're free thinkers in the sense of they're going to continue to question, but they question so much that when they do question, they are worshiping the search because they never want to settle ultimately for a position whether there is God or there is not a God. You have to eventually get to the point of deciding whether there is or there isn't a God. So, Harvard recently, their entrance exam was set up to say, how do you differ from your parents? First question, when it comes to religion. In this country, we have a militancy towards faith and specifically Christianity. Harvard showed that in their first question of their entrance exam. So what does that sow? A type of uncertainty. Now I become uncertain what I believe. And it automatically sets up with, I should disagree with my parents. I need to in order to be a free thinker. Well, let's talk about that for a second. Almost 70% of atheists are white males. We have 2 white males up here right now. Now, that doesn't mean you're conditioned to be an atheist. But when we say free thinker and we start to poke at a pandemic of certainty and dogmatism, showing that this is the religious types who are dogmatic, no, we all have biases. Read the book, Faith of the Fatherless. It shows the top 100 most influential atheists that have really walked to this earth all had daddy issues. Whether that was an absentee father, whether that was a father that passed away, or whether that was an abusive father. It automatically sets you up to doubt, question, and even hate this idea of a father who actually exists as God. So, a pandemic of certainty. I disagree with Bob. I think we have a pandemic of uncertainty, and we are all biased. Whether that's because our family dragged us to church, maybe, and didn't give us an opportunity to question, or whether we were born into a secular society here in the West that was ultimately influenced by the Enlightenment thinker, David Hume. Think clearly about where your biases come from. Understand that we live in a pandemic of uncertainty, so how are you going to grasp and hold on to something that is truth? We all want to be truth seekers. So look underneath your biases. Look under them and carefully decide, okay, am I thinking rationally here? Or am I being swayed by this idea that, no, it's just me, it's just my intellectual thinking. I just think that there's evidence for or there's evidence against God. No, you're emotionally biased, and we have to get underneath that bias. At our church back home, I recently gave a sermon on doubt and how important doubt is. So, Bob's point, I agree with. We don't want to live in a pandemic of certainty when it comes to Christian faith. If you're a Christian here, don't be certain. Don't live by the idolatry of certainty when it comes to your faith. Doubting Thomas. Doubt like doubting Thomas. Until, what does Jesus say? I'm going to physically give you the evidence. Right here, my man. Touch the nail prints in my hands. Thrust your very hand into the spear wound in my side and stop doubting. That's evidence that he gave them. And then he said, go talk to your disciples. They saw me rise from the dead. That's evidence. Now stop doubting and believe. Jesus encouraged, he allowed you to doubt, but allow that doubt to push you towards truth and not a lack of truth.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. The second question tonight is, what evidence has either convinced you or has yet to convince you that there is a God? And Stuart, we'll start with you this time and work our way back down. What evidence has either convinced you or has yet to convince you that there is a God?
We all believe in a virgin birth up here. These guys believe in a virgin birth of the universe. We believe in the virgin birth of Jesus Christ. The virgin birth of the universe is this all came at the beginning and it all popped out of nowhere. That's what Cliffe kept talking about and really trying to hit home. We all believe in miracles up here, but the Christian God says we have a miracle worker. So I start with that every single time. You have to. I believe in the Big Bang, I believe in evolution. I think it jives perfectly with the Christian faith. If that door up there slams hard enough, we're going to hear a big bang, and we're going to all agree that somebody closed that door very hard to cause that big bang. You have to have a great banger to create a big bang. Call that whatever you'd like to call it. But I personally believe if we have the material, which is what we have, the physical material here on this planet, each and every one of you, we're material. If we have a finite universe, which cosmologists, there's academic consensus on that. If we have an opportunity to experience the personal and decision making, well, now we have to start asking the question, what caused the material? It must be immaterial. It must be eternal, outside space and time, to create space and time. It must be all-powerful to actually pull this off. And it must be personal to have made that decision. You can call that a computer. You can call that a force. I personally don't believe that. I think those attributes fully jive and make the most sense when connected to the Christian God.
Gabe, what evidence has either convinced you or yet to convince you that there is a God?
All right, so I guess to kind of piggyback a little, I'm a philosophical atheist. So what that means is I reject all gods. The main reason for this is I find the evidence compelling on the other side. So there are things, especially by Stephen Law, the evil God challenge, that all theodicies, defenses for God's existence, work equally as well for an evil God. Now, I want to also be very clear on something. I don't intend to take their position and kind of say that, no, that's not the case. I don't want to strawman my opponents, which is to say, take their position, make it an easier version, right? It seems that kind of has been going on for a couple of minutes. I don't believe, and the majority of atheists also don't believe, that things just popped out of existence. That's just simply absurd. I think we would all agree that that's just silly. Like, why would we believe something so stupid? The majority consensus in philosophy, so far from the atheistic side, is that there exists something which did this, right? Whether that be a physical thing, if you're a materialist or a physicalist. There's many different ideas on this. I personally haven't studied the issue enough. It is very complex, I admit that. It's so complex that majority of philosophers don't have a consensus on it. It's a very specific thing that we each have to look at, understand the data, and decide whether or not that is the case. I don't necessarily know. It's quite hard. You know, I find the arguments on atheism compelling, otherwise I wouldn't be one. We all find the arguments compelling on one side or another. I'd like to take a quote, actually, from a Christian philosopher who's currently the head of their philosophy and religion department. he says, for instance, let me find it. So, in a question as complex as the existence of God, there's bound to be evidence and arguments on both sides and problems on both sides. Pretending your side has all the evidence and your opponent has all the problems is silly at best and dishonest at worst. I think we can all agree that the topic is complex. People agree and disagree all the time. Others are very confident in their answers, others aren't. We need to each be honest with ourselves and actually consider why we believe something. Do we believe it simply because we've been taught to? Do we believe it simply because we find the arguments compelling? Why do we believe what we believe? I myself didn't know what I believed, really. I was born and raised Catholic. I couldn't defend my position towards Protestants, towards atheists. I couldn't at all. So I researched. And I came to my own conclusion. I think that's what we should all do. And we should have a dialogue with one another like we're doing now. Otherwise, there's going to be no progress at all. And I hope that we can take the other's position and steelman to the best of our ability, which is to increase and better the arguments at which we think they're giving, so we better understand the other's position. If we can't do that, we can't have a productive dialogue. And claiming otherwise is silly. Thank you.
What evidence has either convinced you or is yet to convince you that there is a God?
The reason that I'm convinced there is a God is because order and design points to an intelligent mind. 100 times out of 100. I tried to play basketball in college and had good seats for every game. The difficulty of putting a ball through a hoop 10 feet off the ground is pretty intense and high. And there were 12 other guys on the team who could do it better than I could. So that's why I had good seats for every game. Order and design demands an intelligent mind, 100 times out of 100. If I prepare a delicious meal, set it before you, and then say, there is no cook, the reason that is ridiculous is because you don't get a delicious meal from a tornado sweeping through a vegetable garden. You get a delicious meal from an intelligent mind taking vegetables, meat, and putting it together in an orderly fashion. It is far more reasonable, more credible intellectually for me to believe in the beginning God than it is for me to believe in the beginning hydrogen. Secondly, I believe that there is some type of God because I notice that around the world, anthropology shows us that every culture has some type of religion. We as human beings have this innate drive to know God. Now, the reason that I'm a Christian is because as I look at the different options, be it Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, the evidence supporting Jesus Christ is off the charts. That evidence is not scientific. That evidence is historical. The Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are not once upon a time, wink and blink and nod with a boat ride. No. Instead, the Gospels are, at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this and did that. It reads like the New York Times or the LA Times. So the historical evidence is Jesus died on a cross, was buried in a very well-known tomb, the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and 3 days later he rose from the dead. And Paul, writing in about 52 AD in 1 Corinthians 15, writes, Christ appeared, and in the Gospel we read, he first appeared to some women, and sexism is bad today, but it was far worse back in the first century. And if you want to foist a fable on society, you don't have women as your first eyewitnesses. But the Gospels have the ring of authenticity as Christ first appears risen from the dead to a group of grief-torn women. And then over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who see him risen from the dead. That is historical evidence that he died, he was buried in a very well-known tomb, the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and 3 days later, he appeared, risen from the dead, and over a period of 40 days, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 15, which is right about 52 AD, over 500 people see him risen from the dead, and many of these people are willing to die, not for belief. They're willing to die, not for a religion. They are willing to die for what they claim to have seen, the dead Christ risen from the dead. So that is why I accept the Christian God as the true living God. Another reason that I believe that God exists is because I notice around the world, we as human beings have an innate drive for meaning and purpose in life. If there is no God, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And yet, human experience shows us, no, we as human beings innately have a drive to understand what is the purpose of my life, what is the meaning of my life, what is the value of my life. I can promise you, when I hold a newborn baby in my arms at a hospital, I am overwhelmed with awe at the amazing gift of life. But the question is this hunk of meat simply a meaningless accident, or is this a human being created in the image of God for a purpose? And according to Christ, the purpose of life is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. If there is no God, life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. But if there is a God, it's possible that you were made by an author who has authority, who creates you for a purpose. And that's exactly what Christ communicated. And that makes all the sense of my observation of the universal drive around the world that we as human beings have to understand meaning and purpose in life.
What evidence has either convinced you or yet to convince you that the meaning
Okay. I want the audience to keep an ear out for claims and assertions. No matter how confidently asserted, they are just that, claims and assertions. Another thing I want to clear up is that I identify myself as a questioner. I believe that Cliffe and Stuart believe what they believe. I know a lot of folks hold beliefs like this. I'm not nearly as convinced. That's why I identify as a questioner. I'd actually like to read something real quick. And Cliffe, I'm curious to know if this rings a bell. During World War II, the guards at a Japanese prisoner of war camp would take the English soldiers out into the fields to do hard manual labor. At the end of one day, the guards lined up the English prisoners and counted the tools. They found that one shovel was missing. A guard called out, "Who stole the shovel?" No one responded. The Japanese guard cocked his rifle and said, "All die, all die." Suddenly, one Scottish soldier stepped forward and said, "I stole the shovel." Instantly, he was shot dead. His comrades gathered up his body and the remaining tools and went back to the prisoner of war compound. Back in the prison camp, the Japanese guards counted the tools again. They found that no shovel was missing. The Scottish soldier had sacrificed his life so that his buddies might live. Does that ring a bell?
I've told it many times.
Okay. What I'm wondering is, how confident are you that that story is factually true? Like on a scale of 0 to 100%, where 0 is no confidence, all doubt, 100% all confidence, there's no way I could be mistaken.
I am about 90% convinced, because the man who went through that experience became chaplain at Princeton University in New Jersey. He's an incredible man of great integrity, and I accept eyewitness testimony as a legitimate form of knowledge. So I think it most probably occurred, about 90%.
Okay, I appreciate your candor. So, at that moment, the Argyll stepped forward. Argyll is Scottish person. Stood stiffly to attention and said calmly, "I did it." The guard unleashed all his whipped up hate. He kicked the helpless prisoner and beat him with his fists. Still the Argyll stood rigidly to attention, with the blood streaming down his face. His silence goaded the guard to an excessive rage. Seizing his rifle by the barrel, he lifted it high over his head, with a final howl, brought it down on the skull of the Argyll, who sank limply to the ground and did not move. Although it was perfectly clear that he was dead, the guard continued to beat him and stopped only when exhausted. The men of the work detail picked up their comrade's body, shouldered their tools, and marched back to camp. When the tools were counted again at the guardhouse, no shovel was missing. What's your confidence that your version is factually true?
I think it is factually true. Could there be errors in it? Of course there could be errors in it. But it is factually true that that event occurred.
Your account says he was shot. This account says that he was beaten to death. That's a big difference.
When he died is not stated in the account that I have given. I don't know where that account is actually coming from.
Okay.
But in the accounts that I give, I don't never say that he was beaten to death because we
No,
don't know.
no. Your account says he was shot. This account says he was beaten to death. This is actually Gordon, or Ernest Gordon's account. This is from the book Miracle on the River Kwai. Okay, that was 20 years. He published that 20 years before you wrote the book, your book.
Right.
Now you write later in your book. The most fundamental reason for believing is because Christianity is true. Historically, we can be as certain about what we read of Christ's life in the Bible as of any other recorded event. Your account of Ernest Gordon's, 20 years after his book was written, has an error in it. And you're convinced that a book that is 2,000 years old, that has been translated and edited, is accurate.
That's what I've been thinking about. Okay, the third question we're going to answer tonight is... No, there will be opportunities on Thursday night and Friday night to ask any questions or any follow-up questions. Question number 3. Can I ask that you all take the position of learners? Question number 3, we'll start with you, Bob, and work our way down. Is faith a reliable method of discovering truth?
We really haven't defined what faith is. I guess my question would be, depending on how you define it, and you'll all have to kind of define it for yourselves. The question is, could that method be used as a method to arrive at any belief? Could I use faith to say that all left-handers are better people than right-handers? Could I take that as an article of faith? In my mind, critical thinking appears to be a more reliable way of getting at the truth. That's why I try to use critical thinking in my own positions, and I try to use it in my classes as well. So for example, if I were to take this glass of water and turn it upside down on Gabriel's head, he wouldn't like that very much. But what if I take, this is a CD case. You remember CDs? These are pieces of plastic people used to play music on. Okay, so now I'm going to put my CD case. It's tough to do without a wireless mic. My CD case on the water, and I'm going to turn it upside down. I could put it over his head, couldn't I? Why is that? What's happening there? The atmosphere, 20 miles high, those air molecules have weight. And just like at the bottom of a swimming pool, you feel pressure, right? Your ears hurt because of the weight of the water on top of you. The atmosphere, 20 miles high, 50 miles high, weighs down on us with an atmospheric pressure of 14.7 pounds per square inch. And that pressure keeps the card up, pushing up on that, it holds up that weight of water. Isn't that interesting? I've done this demonstration semester after semester after semester. My students in my physical science class saw that demonstration this morning. But there's more to that story. It turns out I did that demonstration about 10 years ago when I was teaching at Itawamba Community College. I did that demonstration, gave that explanation. Most students just kind of nodded and moved along. And a hand shot up. And that moment is what I call the Freppen objection. Aaron Freppen, my student, said, what if the glass, instead of being full of water, what if it was full of air? He said, doesn't a glass full of air weighs a lot less than a glass full of water? Why is the car not staying up? I was standing there in front of 30 students, caught flat-footed, and I said, Mr. Freppen, I don't know. It was a wonderful question. It was a big moment for me as a teacher as well as a human being. Because I was 100% certain. Now all of a sudden my certainty has dropped. That's what an honest person does. They are able to adjust their certainty, especially when the claim, which is that the atmospheric pressure is holding up, is falsifiable. It's important to me that my claims, the things that I believe in, are falsifiable. If there's no element, there's no characteristic of falsifiability, then I don't really value that claim. So the question is then, well, what's holding it up? I can do this. All right. Tool. Wedding veil material. All right. You want the full explanation? You're going to have to watch my video. That QR code, that critical thinking lectures, click that QR code and you'll get a chance to get the answer.
I don't know what you're getting. Lowering certainty.
Hey, to me, hey, there's a big contradiction in the Bible. How did Judas Iscariot die? In the Gospels and in Acts, there's a different account. One account is he hanged himself. The other account is he fell over, split open his bowels, and his bowels fell out. There's your contradiction, Cliff. I said, really? Have you ever tried to hang yourself? Yeah, it's quite possible that the noose might slip. You might fall out over and split open your midsection. There is absolutely no contradiction in the Bible when it says, in one place, Judas Iscariot hanged himself, and in another space, he died because his bowels split open and his intestines spilled out. No contradiction at all. It's different perspectives on what really happened. So, bridge over the River Kwai, miracle on the River Kwai. Japanese guards beat a man with their rifles. And they also shot him. It's not a contradiction. Shooting and beating someone with a rifle are both possible in an accurate historical account. So what is faith? Faith is evidence plus commitment. Faith is evidence plus commitment for a Christian. Which means faith is not blind, faith is based not on proof, it's based on evidence. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, I will get on a hunk of metal at your airport here. And I will trust that hunk of metal with my entire body to fly me safely to Atlanta Airport. Before I step on that hunk of metal, I'm going to see the word Delta, Boeing. And I'm going to say, there is evidence, not proof, but evidence. Evidence that that hunk of metal was put together by reliable mechanics. Based on that evidence, I'm going to make an incredible commitment. I'm going to step onto a hunk of metal, trusting it to get me safely to Atlanta, Georgia. That is faith. Wise faith is based on proof, but it's based on evidence. Blind faith is faith that has no evidence to support it. It simply believes for the sake of believing. Christianity is falsifiable. It's recorded in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. The Apostle Paul writes, if Jesus Christ is not risen from the dead, you're fools. I'm a fool for believing in it. But if Jesus Christ has risen from the dead, it is very wise to believe in it. That appeals to me as a thinking human being. It means that Christianity is verifiable or falsifiable. So now the question is, what is the historical evidence that Christ really did rise from the dead? It begins with, he really did die. He didn't swoon or lapse into unconsciousness. He really did die. And we get the evidence for that in the Gospel of John, where we read that a Roman soldier took a spear and jammed it into the side of Christ, and an issue of watery serum, separate from red, hard, clotted blood, flows from his side. That is not known in the first century to be a medical sign of death. We know today that if you have a major gash in your torso, and watery serum flows out from hardened blood, you've not been sucking wind in the past couple of minutes. It's a sign of heart failure, massive clotting in the arteries. You're dead. Stone dead. We read in the eyewitness account, they take the body of Christ off the cross, they put it in a tomb, they roll a stone in front of the tomb, they set a guard to make sure there's no hanky-panky, no stealing of the body, and then we read that 3 days later, this dead Christ appears risen from the dead, first of all to some grief-torn women, and then over a period of 40 days, he appears to over 500 people who saw him risen from the dead. Why did Christianity grow so fast in Israel? Why were Jewish people willing to die for this supposed resurrected Messiah, this resurrected Christ? Because the historical facts are, too many people saw Christ risen from the dead, and they converted and put their faith in Christ. Faith is evidence plus commitment.
Okay, Gabriel, is faith a reliable method of discovering truth?
Yeah, so I of course would ask like how are we defining it. With Cliffe's definition, yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's evidence plus commitment. Yeah, it's totally fine. As long as we have enough evidence to justify something, of course. I don't think there's much question about that. I'm not really going to talk about the historicity, as I'm not a historical person that much. I'm more going to talk about the philosophy of things. There is one part that I'm a little confused about with regards to Cliffe's, response. It's mainly to do with people believing things and then dying for those beliefs. I think we all know that there are people who believe aliens exist, and have been abducted, right? There's still people who apparently believe Elvis is alive, funnily enough. Those are interesting beliefs that people have. They perhaps have evidence to believe that, or they don't. I don't necessarily know. They have personal beliefs or personal experiences that account for those beliefs. I'm not really going to question those. I think those are evidence towards that belief, but I don't think it's good evidence. With regard to God, Jesus, and all that, we have to go by a mechanism about how we determine whether or not things that happen in the Bible are actually true. So I think the majority of scholars on this issue are like, yeah, Jesus existed. Pretty much all scholar. I don't think many people would argue against that unless they're mythicists, which is quite a weird position to hold, especially with the data that we have. Jesus definitely existed. There were people, Josephus, you have two other accounts that mention Jesus, at least in some capacity, that show that, yeah, people believe that he existed and believe that he rose from the dead. That's totally fine. Did he actually rise from the dead? That's the biggest question we have to ask. Do we have any supernatural evidence? Do we have any way to justify these supernatural claims? I don't think so. I don't think we can show that, and the majority of Christians actually agree on that. They say the evidence for supernatural evidence is indisputable, cannot be used at all. In that case, I think faith kind of takes on a different meaning. at that point, Cliffe distinguished between blind faith and the faith that he was talking about. With regard to blind faith, I don't think that is a good way to come to a position. I think we would all agree with that. If we just accept a proposition because we like it, that'd be dumb. We wouldn't like to do that. We shouldn't do that, really. When we take a look at a position, we have to consider it carefully, especially if it's a position that is pretty much bases your entire worldview. Right? We have to consider carefully whether or not this belief that we have is actually the case, or if it's not. Do we have enough evidence to justify it? Do we have enough arguments to show that it is the case? For Jesus, for his resurrection, I don't think we do. And I think I'd be definitely interested to see if we could technically prove that. I'd be interested to see how Stuart responds, honestly, with regard to evidence for the supernatural claims. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Stuart, you're gonna wrap up this question. Is faith a reliable method of discovering truth?
Testing. All right, because Pop's preached, I'm going to try and preach here for a second. So the physical constants that Bob had to work with here in order to pull off his experiments, he had to believe that those physical constants would remain constant in order to do that. We worked with the Pythagorean theorem. Okay, the Pythagorean theorem was based off of the mathematical constants in the universe. We didn't just make up and create those mathematical constants. That's part of the incredible creativity as well as order and design that we have always had in this universe. So, when you talk about, for example, people dying for belief, okay, radically different. When it comes to Elvis, when it comes to aliens, when it comes to those who flew planes into the World Trade Center. They had a belief, they had a doctrine, and they thought that by doing so, that would get them into paradise. And so they flew those planes, a very insidious, obviously evil type of dogma to kill people. The disciples, radically different. They saw the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who made claims and backed them up by his life, and then they were willing to die for what they saw based off of that evidence that he rose from the grave. No one is going to die for what they know to be a lie. That's why this is not a cover-up. No one is going to die for what they know to be a lie. That is radically different from the illustration of Elvis, aliens, whatever, spaghetti monster, whatever you'd like to call it. So, think about constants. Think about the radical difference between what the disciples died for, why they died for it, and somebody dying for Elvis. Now, I'd like to go to something that atheists have never been able to answer, at least I've never seen them answer, and that is information. Information is immaterial. Information is what we share and do probably 95% of our life with, right? Your conversation is informational. It's not materialistic. If there is no God, everything is material. It's just from a naturalistic understanding of the universe. So, here we go right here. There's paper. There's ink blots. Now, I'm going to look at those ink blots, make sense of them, and tell Bob what exactly I'm reading. That's information transmitted between me and Bob. If you're at a restaurant, you read a menu, you see the ink blots, you make sense of it, and you tell the waiter, I want a pork sandwich. By doing so, that's immaterial, and I believe that type of information is connected to a God, and that God being the God that starts right out of the beginning of the Gospel of John. The Word became flesh. Every worldview believed in some type of order back then. The Greeks, the Romans. But it was Christianity that said, God broke through space and time and brought us information, the Word. The great Word became flesh. And you brought up the Japanese war camp, so I want to go there for a second. The Shinton Compound, I'd like you to read it, by Langdon Gilkey. And Langdon Gilkey talks about how he went to China. But he was from Harvard, he ditched his faith, he thought faith was a joke. He was a secular humanist from Harvard. And he gets to China, but The Japanese come over and he gets imprisoned in a prisoner of war camp right after 1940, so World War II was breaking out. And what occurred there is he ran into somebody called Eric Liddell. Anybody seen Chariots of Fire around here? Chariots of Fire. Okay, he broke many different records in the Olympics. Eric Liddell was a strong Christian. Langdon Gilkey, as this Harvard brilliant secular humanist who ditched his faith, comes in and says, I truly believe in the goodness of humankind. I believe when we get into these bunks, and some of these bunks in this prisoner of war camp, there's 3 of them. Others have 9. And I believe those who have 3, but there's 5 inmates in there, and there's extra beds over in the one that holds 9, I'm sure those inmates will allow us to come over and share so it's equal, and we're not stuck in this tiny little room together. Instead, there's equality in it. That makes sense, right? That did not happen. The selfishness and evil and dread of humanity came out. And all of a sudden, people saw Eric Liddell and his buoyancy, his love, his joy that he found in Christ. And ultimately, he ended up dying of a brain tumor. But people saw that and started becoming Christian. Langdon Gilkey went back to his faith because of the sacrifice and the love he saw in Eric Liddell. And he understood every human being has a sinful problem. The secular humanist says every human being is perfect, is great, is innately great. No, the Christian understanding is we are created in the image of God, we are great, but we have a sin nature.
Thank you. Cliffe and Stuart, I do ask, we're not here to preach tonight, so I do ask that you do stay in your seats for this last remaining question. The last question, so we'll start with you and then work our way down to Bob. Last question tonight is, are morals just a construction of individual or societal decisions and norms?
Can I just stand?
You can stand, okay.
I'm gonna move. All right, so back in Vietnam, there was a sociologist at UPenn, and he listened to many students come up to this open mic and blast away, and they're thinking of the Vietnam War. And so many said, you're gonna go blow up villages, you're gonna go kill babies? This is horrendous. And on they went. Finally, a student stood up and said, you guys are all wrong here. Why do you care so much about babies being bombed? That's ridiculous. And this person, she went on to say that I have an eternal value system that transcends moral relativism, where it's just I decide whether blowing up babies is wrong, blowing up tribes is wrong, or not. After she said that, atheists tried to respond and say, well, it's for the good of humanity that we should stop this. And she responded by saying, well, who defines the good of humanity? And why the preservation of life if there is no more moral objectivity and eternal values? You could have heard a pin drop. The conversation completely stopped. All moral relativists, all atheists, just listened to her. Martin Luther King Jr. talked about the same thing. A law above the law in order to critique and say the racism in Alabama and beyond is really objectively wrong. So when you think about morality, what are you going to ultimately put your faith in terms of, is there moral obligation above it all? When I use ought, should, you absolutely should do something. You should not burn cats, little kitties to death. I am ushering in a moral obligation that transcends culture, and when I do so, that points to a moral lawgiver, and I believe that's God.
Okay, the question is, are morals just a construction of individual or societal decisions and norms?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I'm a moral realist, which is to say I believe in objective moral facts. There was a little bit of talk about relativism and moral realism, so objective moral facts. So for one, we'd like to clarify what relativism is. That is that you have two opposing views of morality about what is right and wrong, and those are equated the exact same. I don't hold to that. I think that's dumb. Sorry. But we also have a few other views. Metaethics is incredibly complex. I dare say I don't know barely anything about it half the time. So we have to clarify there's also moral nihilism, also known as error theory. There is emotivism, and there is, I believe, pragmatism. These are all completely different views. Relativism says they are equal. Moral nihilism says morality just simply doesn't exist. Error theory very similar and basically almost practically the same as moral nihilism, says you should be skeptical about whether or not morality is true to a sense. Then you have emotivism, which just says they are moral, basically, statements are just, I don't like that. So there's so much complexity with regards to morals. Saying all atheists must be moral relativists isn't the case. He didn't say that, but he is somewhat implying it. So to answer that, I'm going to present about 3 separate moral accounts for under atheism, and I'd also like to address a point he said earlier about if you're an atheist, you must be a materialist. That's simply not the case. I recommend Michael Huemer. I recommend Majesty of Reason on YouTube, Joe Schmidt, incredible philosophers. Joe Schmidt, I believe, doesn't actually state a position, believes that there is something possibly non-natural with regard to morals. Michael Huemer is a non-naturalist. He believes in non-naturalistic moral realism, which is to say that morality exists by these non-natural facts that oversee everything, and we don't know what exactly these are, they just oversee it. So basically from his view, morality just exists, these moral facts just exist. You also can take a Platonistic account, if you would like, by saying that there are these Platonistic forms for goodness and badness, and these forms are sets of other kind of forms, right? And these outline morality. So those are 2 views. You also can hold my view, which is that moral properties exist and are illimitable in the best experience that we have of the universe. Another one is from Shelley Kagan, one of my favorite philosophers, has a great section and lecture on death. It's got 26 episodes. Absolutely fantastic. His position is that if we were perfectly rational beings, we would have these moral laws that we would have. And these moral laws are what exist. And morality is based purely on rationality. I somewhat disagree with this, as I'm more for, these properties exist. Right? There's so much complexity within this topic, it's not even funny. It's actually crazy. I encourage you, look up some theories. They're quite interesting to discuss and talk about with other people. I don't think anyone here actually knows full meta-ethics. And I'd actually like to quote of the same philosopher again, who actually talks about morality. So, this one is interesting. He says, basically what I'm trying to say is you cannot refute atheism by shouting objective morality while pounding the table. He also states as well that the question is badly worded. The mere denial of theism obviously can't account for anything. The question is, can you account for objective morality without God? Good question. But can you account for objective morality with appeal to God? Is also a good question. And he also states, I'm a Christian philosopher, and I don't think God plays an illimitable role in the best theories of grounding of morality. We have to consider this question carefully, and it's quite difficult if we try to strawman one. Thank you.
Cliff, are morals as a construction of individual or societal decisions?
In order to have a moral, you've got to have a thinking mind. This table, this stage, the ceiling has no ability to make a moral decision. In order to understand right and wrong, in order to define right and wrong, you have to have a thinking mind. So what are the options? First option, I only know 4 options. First option is the powerful, elite. They define right and wrong. My problem with that is the Nazis had lots of power. I am convinced that gassing Jews was wrong. Second option, the majority define right and wrong. My problem with that is, if you are living in a culture like a gang that defines good as you have to go out and murder someone in order to be part of our gang, that does not make it right. Just because the majority of people in a culture or a group agree on what's right or wrong. Third option is, well, The power elite, the majority, it's the individual. It really comes down to the individual. Morality is relative, and so it's you who define right and wrong for yourself, and I define it for myself, and it's all relative. Therefore, you better not tell me what's right and wrong, and I better not tell you what's right and wrong, because it's all relative. The problem with that is, I am convinced that there's more than enough evidence that I have made a lot of mistakes, that you have made a lot of mistakes. And if you're going to try and ground morality in individualism, and that it's the individual who creates it, you're in trouble. Because that means there is absolutely no right and wrong objectively. It is simply a prejudice, a bias, a subjective experience. And then the fourth option is God, an eternal being whose character is good, and right and wrong are defined by God's character, which means there never was a time when right and wrong did not exist. Because God is eternal, God's character defines right versus wrong. God has given us rational minds and consciences, which we, by exercising, can begin to understand what is right and what is wrong. Now, if there is no life after death, it is impossible for right and wrong in any objective sense to exist. Why? Where is Adolf Hitler if there is no God right now? Where is Mother Teresa if there is no God right now? In the same place. It's called the fertilizer pit. So it really doesn't matter whether you are Adolf Hitler II or Mother Teresa II. You all are going to the same pit along with me, the fertilizer pit. But if there is a God, and if there is the possibility of eternity in heaven or separate from God in hell, then it ultimately does matter what you and I do with our lives today, because right and wrong are not totally relative. They're not just a bias and a prejudice. And right and wrong do not come out of the barrel of a gun. Who's got the power? That's the one who defines right and wrong. Baloney. Right and wrong are real values. And when you look at the life of Harriet Tubman, you understand that this woman had incredible courage as she led slaves out of the South into the free North at the possibly losing her life in the process, but she defied that, and she consistently led those slaves to freedom. Why? Because she had a conscience, because she understood that right and wrong are not defined by the powerful people, by the intelligentsia, by the majority. Instead, right and wrong flow from the good character of God. We have consciences and rational minds, and by exercising them responsibly, we can really understand what is right versus what is wrong. And guess what, Harriet Tubman said? It's worth it for me to lay down my life for what is just and true and really right. I know atheists have laid down their lives for what's just and true and right at times, but there is no basis for doing that, because it's just a relative category. Harriet Tubman understood slavery is not relatively wrong. Slavery is absolutely wrong, because human beings created in the image of God have an innate value, and that is why I will put my life on the line in order to leave slaves for freedom.
Bob, close out tonight. The final question is, are morals just a construction of individual or societal decisions?
All right, heavy question. Oh, you can't head out yet. I promise there's something good coming. First of all, I am so thrilled that everyone turned out tonight. I hope, these are important questions, and you guys are at the perfect time. It gives me great hope for the future that so many people are interested in asking these questions. Keep on asking the important questions. Important questions like, can vegetarians eat animal crackers? If vegetarians eat vegetables, what do humanitarians eat? Get it? All right. And why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? You guys have been so patient listening to all this. Let's play a song, shall we? My guitar won't get picked up. I wrote a song, this is actually about childhood curiosity. It's called Why Don't Dogwood Trees Ever Get Fleas? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Is flea powder in the flowers, or could it be that the bark is bigger than a little flea's bite? Are they scratching when I'm sleeping in the middle of the night? Do they make a flea collar just fit for a tree? Same brand that makes the braces for the little bee's knees. Do you ever ask questions quite as silly as these? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Well, did you ever stop to wonder why question marks bent? I asked my mom and then I asked her what inquisitive meant. The letter Y is my favorite in the alphabet. My favorite game is 20 questions that I've never lost yet. Does a dandelion roar? Can you tame a tiger lily? Do horseflies wear saddles, or is that just simply silly? The one question keeps bugging me I've never understood. Why please chew upon the dog if they won't chew upon the wood? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Is flea powder in the flowers, or could it be that the bark is bigger than a little flea's bite? Are they scratching when I'm sleeping in the middle of the night? Do they make a flea collar just fit for a tree? Same brand that makes the braces for the little bee's knees. Do you ever ask questions quite as silly as these? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? I was born a boy, wonder, and I always wonder why. The color blue just seems to be the perfect color. The color blue just seems to be the perfect color for the sky. Did you ever wonder what makes to make a willow weep? Do sheep count on the bridge when they get themselves to sleep? Are their apples made of crab? Are the flies made out of butter? Does chocolate milk only come from special cows and chocolate udders? That one pestering question just will not leave me be. Why can't a tree trick a picnic and always full of fling? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Is flea powder in the flowers, or could it be that the bark is bigger than a little flea's bite? Are they scratching when I'm sleeping in the middle of the night? Do they make a flea collar just fit for a tree? Same brand that makes the braces for the little bee's knees. Do you ever ask questions quite as silly as these? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Do chickens get the chicken pox? Why does a pirate wear a patch? When these questions come to mind, it's like an itch I got a scratch. Why is the word phonetically not spelled phonetically? Tell me, is there any cure for my curiosity? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Flea powder in the flowers, or could it be that the bark is bigger than a little flea's bite? Are they scratching when I'm sleeping in the middle of the night? Do they make a flea collar just fit for a tree? Same brand that makes the braces for the little bee's knees. Do you ever ask questions when you're sleeping? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Why don't dogwood trees ever get fleas? Thank you so much. So, 45 seconds. I've never heard that kind of an applause. I will mention my sound hole here says, for those in the back, this machine surrounds certainty and forces it to think again. This is an homage to my folk music heroes, Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. Woody Guthrie had on his guitar, "This machine kills fascists." Pete Seeger said, "This machine surrounds hate and forces it to surrender." I implore you, anytime you think you're certain about something, ask another question. Check out my QR code again. I'm giving up certainty for Lent. Read that blog post. Check out my content. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.